Life's a garden, dig it. I recently resumed my yoga practice after a long hiatus, this time with hot yoga at a local studio. Each week, as we lay stretched out and sweaty in the semi-darkness of the room at the end of class, our yoga instructor ends our practice with the statement, "Life's a garden, dig it." After almost a month of practice, I couldn't help but think of this affirmation when I read our parable of the sower in today's gospel. Now, the parable of the sower appears in two gospels, Matthew and Mark. Mark's version invites us to look at Jesus, the sower, the gardener, if you will. Matthew's version, which we heard today, is much more focused on the garden itself, the soil in which the seeds will grow. Life's a garden, dig it. In Matthew's gospel, Jesus is clear that we, as people, are the soil. We are the dirt. We are not in the garden, but rather we are the garden. In some ways, this is appropriate because in Genesis, God forms the first human out of dirt and breath. When Jesus heals the blind man in John's gospel, he uses spit and mud to restore the blind man to the fullness of community, of belonging. Science tells us that our bones are made of carbon, the same element that permeates the ground beneath our feet and the dirt under our fingernails. In other words, we might say, you are a garden, dig it. If we are a garden, if we are the soil, what kind of soil are we? Jesus' parable from Matthew today offers us four options: a stony path, rocky soil, a tangled thorn patch, and good soil. If our soil is a stony paved path, rigid and cold, nothing will penetrate our hearts. Compassion will not sway us. Whatever we receive will be immediately deflected and fall away, like the seeds that get eaten by the birds in the parable from Jesus today. If our garden is instead full of rocks and stones, anything that is planted will topple over at the first sign of stress. Intense seasons of scrutiny or parched days with no shade will leave us depleted and dry because we cannot tap into the deeper roots of Jesus' love and mercy for us. Likewise, a garden crowded out by weeds and thorns leaves little room for the good fruit to grow. If our garden is full of distractions and thorns, we cannot hear God's calling in our lives. Which brings us to good soil. We all want to be good soil, don't we? We all want to produce the fruits of the Spirit, which Paul tells us are love, peace, forbearance, joy, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. We want to be like Mary Magdalene, who meets the risen Jesus, the gardener, in the Garden of Gethsemane. We want to experience the joy that the hymn writer Austin Miles wrote about in his song, In the Garden. I come to the garden alone, while the dew is still on the roses, and the voice I hear falling on my ear, the Son of God discloses. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. And the joy we share as we tarry there, none other has ever known. How do we care for good soil? What sort of nutrients and care do we need to ensure that our soil is rich and dark and healthy? Like any garden, the answer depends on our climate, or in this case, our temperament. For some people, it might be silent meditation. For others, it might be giving back to the community by working in a food pantry or soup kitchen. For even others, it could be joining our morning prayer team on Zoom each week or singing in our choir. We are all uniquely and wonderfully made. Our variations are part of the beauty of God's creation. Like any good gardener, we must experiment to see what will nourish us and help us to grow and flourish. At our house, we have a garden in our backyard, a raised garden bed just off the back patio. Now, our garden does not have the ideal placement for maximum crop yield. It gets too much shade in the morning and only gets the full sun for a few hours every afternoon. While its placement might not be ideal, it is an inviting landscape on our patio when we sit out there with friends. It was lovingly built by my husband for Mother's Day a few years ago, and I love seeing the pop of green growth as I look out our sliding glass door each morning or every time I walk through our living room. It's a shaded garden, but it's our garden. The shade, however, does mean our yield is smaller and later than many other gardens. When other people have been eating those big, fat, juicy tomatoes of summer for weeks, we're still patiently waiting for our green tomatoes to turn red. The fruits of our garden may be smaller and slower than other people, and yet I start each morning in the garden, watering can in hand. I dutifully water our small but mighty garden and wait patiently for the tomatoes and peppers to fill our kitchen and our bellies. I monitor our rain gauge, watching to see what, if anything, might be needed and what has already been provided. Life's a garden, dig it. Perhaps your life, your garden, is a lot like mine. It feels smaller and slower than your neighbor's garden or the idyllic garden that you see online. Maybe you feel behind or lacking in some way. Or maybe you live in an apartment and the closest thing to a garden is a small potted plant or a plastic plant even, which feels like nothing compared to the better homes and gardens that you imagine elsewhere. Fear not, my beloved. Matthew's gospel leaves room for all sorts of yields of all sorts of sizes. While my garden is not the most prolific, I am faithful. Ultimately, that is what we are called to be, faithful. I keep showing up with my watering can, ready to tend my garden. This is what the gardener, Jesus, wants for us, faithful discipleship. Now, what if our hearts feel more like a stony, shallow garden or a tangled mess of weeds and thorns? The good news is that we can remove the stones, rocks, weeds, and thorns. We can cultivate good soil out of the rocky field or the overgrown pasture. It might take some effort. There might be some painful pruning as we remove the things that keep us from experiencing the fullness of God's love for us and the entire creation. Whatever our garden looks like today, we can cultivate the garden in which God meets us. We can tend to the gardens of our hearts, and in doing so, experience the love and companionship of Jesus, who walks beside us in the garden. Life's a garden, dig it. Amen.